Okay, hello folks, and welcome to Global Astrology. Know your nation, know yourself. And today, this is going to be a slight deviation, actually. In fact, not even a slight deviation, a big deviation from what I would normally do. As you know, I focus on nations, and I've been focusing on the British nation in particular, but I'm honoring a request from one of my subscribers who's called Shamila Ghosh. So thanks for requesting this one, and so a big shout out to you. Now, Shamila is a fan of my channel, and she asked me the very pertinent question of if I could do a reading for Kim Jong-un. Now, who is, of course, the leader of North Korea. And I thought this was an intriguing question. And I've been busy over the last weekend with consultations and stuff like that. But I thought I'll take this opportunity for my Wednesday upload to actually explore. So what I did was I've got up his chart and I've started to dig. Now, this is a cracker. I mean, this chart has got all sorts of intrigue in it. Now, Kim Jong-un was born, let me just double check, I forgot to actually write down on here, but he was born on the 8th of January 1984. Now, there's no official birth time for Kim Jong-un. However, as we know that he is the leader of the nation, I have given him the time of 12 p.m., 12 noon, because this is often when the sun is at its highest, and it's often when it's in the 10th house. Now, either way, just with just general indicators as they are, him being the supreme leader of North Korea, it's actually quite appropriate for him to actually have that birth time. Of course, I can't completely confirm that, but my goodness, does it fit? Anyway, so, and also as well, I'd like to introduce my wand. It's come at last. So instead of pointing with chopsticks and paintbrush as I was before, I can now point far more gracefully than before. Right, I'm going to get started. This is a fascinating chart, and obviously he's a very interesting man. And although there is lots of speculation, of course, I'm an astrologer, and I can neither confirm nor deny. And I just want to put that disclaimer out there that this is just a tool as a piece of insight into how astrology can work and answer very interesting questions. Right, let's begin. Now, first of all, with any chart, particularly when you're talking about any person, you need to look at the first house. Now, the first house is here in Pisces. So that means when the ascendant being in Pisces under the old rulership, that's Jupiter. And Jupiter is expansive, yeah? And the first house represents the body. So this could suggest an expansive body. Yeah? I think that's correct. Anyway, so that sets the lordships of the houses, etc. So that makes Jupiter Lord of the first house in the D1 chart, the first divisional chart. And then we see we have some aspects of the second house, which is in Aries. So this is family, values, upbringing, etc. Gives a martial quality. Remember Mars? Mars is the planet of war. The planet of conflict, strategy, etc. And we know already that there is very much a martial, almost kind of warlike footing to everything that Kim Jong-un currently does. And of course, just that family background and stuff. It explains itself. Now, this is the first really interesting house coming up. This is the third house. This is Rahu, the North Node, the insatiable part of us, the part of us that becomes obsessed. It's intelligence. It's our appetite for the world, how we go about getting our needs met, and that earthly part of us that wants everything now, quick, and as quick as we can. Now, the third house is also the house not only of communications, which of course will probably be quite dynamic. Rahu is a very dynamic sign, but the important thing is it's also the house of siblings. Yeah, and this is important because Taurus is also a feminine sign. And not only that, he's actually got Rahu in Rohini. So this is a very, in terms of like going, so not only does it indicate that he has a female sibling, which he does, and her name is Kim Jo-Young, but in terms of his character, Taurus also represents the face and the mouth and the teeth and kind of the food that we like to eat. Now, if you put the headless, insatiable appetite of Rahu in the third house, which is also the third house of desires, in the sign of Taurus, which is the sign of food and consumption and luxuries, combined with almost the addictive and obsessive qualities of Rahu, what do you get? This suggests that this is someone who is absolutely almost insatiable when it comes to like their food, drink, smoking. We know already that that Kim Jong-un is a heavy smoker. Rahu is actually associated with smoking. So when you put that in the house of desire, there's this almost constant need to fulfill one's desires, but almost as if one's desires are never satisfying. He would just keep going and going and going and going. Now, obviously, North Korea is very secretive. We can't corroborate these things, but when I look at the chart and in terms of his physicality and the issues that he's had in the past, over consuming and this desire and need to constantly almost fill himself up is there and present in the chart. So I thought that was very interesting. Not only that as well, we see that there is an aspect from Mars in the 8th house going up to the 3rd house, which is adding even more energy to that. And and there's also an aspect from Venus going to the 3rd house as well. I forgot to draw that line. I'll have to draw it in, but just imagine it. Venus as well is also food, luxuries, the good life. But not only that, Venus is also Lord of the 8th house. And the 8th house is the house of taboos, things that are hidden, but also addictions as well. So she's aspecting that 3rd house, adding it even more. So, of course, this can't be corroborated and, this is probably kept secret, but I can see some very addictive patterns at work here. And we'll get to talk about this 8th house in a minute, which is just astonishing, frankly. So we see this already. There's a lot of desire. There's a lot of consumption. When we look at the 6th house, there's no planets in the 6th house, but just because there's no planets in there, it doesn't mean nothing is going on. Especially as well when we take that opportunity and we can also look at the Navamsha charts. Now, this is the D9 chart. This is something that we use in Vedic astrology. And essentially, if you imagine one of these squares, which is a whole sign, divided into 9 pieces, that gives you the D9 chart. And it's like an X-ray. It shows you the true internal quality of the planets and also as well what is manifesting for a person in their life as they mature. So we see here we have an aspect from Jupiter to the 6th house in Leo. Now, what you need to remember is Jupiter expands things, and Jupiter is actually very fond of the sign of Leo because it belongs to his best friend, the Sun. However, it does expand whatever it is, for good or bad. And sometimes you don't really want Jupiter expanding your 6th house because the 6th house is a house of challenges. It's also the house of health and well-being, but particularly when things go wrong with the health. We need to look at the 6th house, and we see here that Jupiter is making an aspect to that. On top of that, Jupiter is also with the Lord of the 6th house. So you see this is 6th house here. And the Lord of Leo, or the ruler of Leo, is the Sun. So there's a combination here. On top of that, now I'm kind of like jumping backwards and forwards a bit, so forgive me, because it's actually quite exciting, this chart. If we just focus on this 10th house now, what is the 10th house? The 10th house, I call it like the hot house. It's the house of our highest dharma, public reputation. It's also the house of leaders, CEOs. Anyone who's got planets in the 10th house will find that they're going to have their public life emphasized in some kind of way. What is very interesting about Kim Jong-un's chart is that he's got stelliums, 3 stelliums. So stellium is when there's 3 planets or more in one house. So you can see here, 3. He's got 3 here, 3 here, and then he's got 4 planets in the 10th house. This gives the 10th house a tremendous amount of emphasis. Not only that, but also as well, Jupiter, Mercury and Sun are all karkas. That means indicators of the 10th house. So he's got all of the 10th, Saturn is also one, but it's not there. But he's got 3 planets that are to do with the 10th house actually in the 10th house. This is extraordinarily powerful. This is like off the charts kind of stuff, which kind of makes sense because effectively he was, he's a dictator, isn't he? So there's that shows absolute power, where these planets are really just reinforcing everything. However, there is trouble in Denmark, so to speak, because here you'll see planet Mercury is retrograde. Yeah, now this is common. Mercury goes retrograde every, about 3 times every year. So that in itself is not that unusual. However, you see here, Neptune. Now remember, Neptune is a very tricky planet. It's very spiritual. It gives a lot of gifts and talents for music, performance, arts, etc., all that stuff. However, Neptune is associated with disease. Now, as you've seen before in my more kind of corona focused videos, do you remember when I said whenever there's a connection between Mercury and Neptune, this has proved very significant for like nations in terms of how they experience the coronavirus. It's affected them very strongly. Now, of course, North Korea is completely isolated, so I'll be very surprised if corona has managed to make it there. Even if it has, we wouldn't even know anyway. But it's known for its secrecy. Now, Neptune is an exceptionally secretive planet. Now, isn't it interesting that the leader of North Korea, which in itself is very isolated and secretive, has that planet Neptune in between Jupiter and Mercury? So if you can imagine, Jupiter is our ideals, the things that we reach for, expansion, our philosophies. It's also in its own sign of Sagittarius, which again shows ideologies, philosophy. So we know that the ideologies are extremely strong. We've got Mercury, which is the planet of communication, which is also there as well, but it's retrograde, so it's even more sort of introspective. Then Neptune is between the two, adding mystery and fog and very unusual aspects, to everything in that 10th house. So as much as he's this public figure, very few people really know the Kim Jong-un. Very few. And this even goes because the sun is government. This even goes for people in his government. He's probably got a very, very secretive inner circle. We know that the sister is significant. She's probably one of the only ones that really knows what's going on. And we just see with that combination there's that extreme mystery, that extreme secrecy, which has been maintained by Kim Jong-un, so that even to this day, North Korea is a country that's hard to penetrate. It's hard to learn. It's hard to know what's going on there. So what I want to also talk about is here, if we look at the ninth house, this is, in a way, it's kind of less significant, but it explains a lot of what's going on there. So we have here the eighth lord, Venus, in the ninth house, and the ninth house is to do with ideology and philosophy and beliefs, but it's also with planet Uranus, which is very unpredictable, very unusual. And then it's also with Ketu as well, which is, Ketu in itself is an unusual planet. Like the nodes of the moon are misfits. It's where we become quite uptight. It's known as the castle. This is where we can become a little bit kind of rigid. It shows the past life, our past skills and talents. And all of this is in Scorpio, which is one of the most deepest occult and transformative signs. So this shows that in terms of like the arts, Venus, and his spiritual beliefs, Ketu, they're very unusual because they're also combined with planet Uranus. So this is someone that is a deeply unconventional thinker in terms of his philosophies and ideologies, which of course, again, you know, it doesn't take rocket science. This is how it's played out in the world. But at least you can see it here for oneself. Now, what I want to talk about is the moon here when it comes to Kim Jong-un. Now, this is very, very significant. Wherever the moon falls in the chart is significant anyway. But particularly so in Vedic astrology, because the moon represents the mind, yeah? How we feel about things, how we process our emotions, how we look at the world. It's said that the moon is sort of like the soil that our consciousness grows up in. So, and because the moon is very sensitive, it's the most sensitive part of the chart, but it's very social as well. The moon likes company. Remember that. The moon likes company. If we think of lockdown, when we think of our friends and our family and the people that we want to connect with, we want to hug, and you know, people that we love, that's very much the moon. That intuitive connection, that needing to kind of reach out and belong. However, if you see here, Kim Jong-un has got something called Kema Drummer Moon. Yeah? What does that mean? It means the moon is completely isolated, and he has the pure version. So you see, this is the drishti, the aspects. The moon has no aspects at all. That moon is completely on its own because there's no planet before and there's no planet after the moon. And on top of that, it receives no aspects. Yeah. And it's said, and this is something that is very much extolled by a wonderful astrologer called Joni Petrie. She's fantastic. And she's actually written a book on Neptune and about its mysteries. But this is something that is very well known in Vedic astrology. When the moon is alone, it cracks. They say that the mind cracks because that moon doesn't have anything to support it on either side. And this causes a great anguish and anxiety, because the thing is, when there's an issue with the moon, we just never feel that we're quite right. We always feel that we're kind of alone in some kind of way. So even though Kim Jong-un is, the leader of a whole nation, it is very highly possible that when he's standing there in front of all the parades and all that kind of hoo-ha that's going on, and the goose marching and all that kind of stuff, he's probably feeling very lonely. Not only that, the moon is in the sign of Shatabisha, which means the sign of 1,000 healers. However, this can also deal with addictions and diseases that are very hard to cure. Now, this can create amazing doctors, yeah, and healers and astrologers and all the like. However, because this moon is isolated and essentially it represents him, if we were to take that as Chandra Lagna, which means having that as the ascendant, this guy, I would say he's quite broken up inside. And then on top of that, it's also in the 12th house. Now, the 12th house is one of the more tricky houses. It doesn't mean it's always a bad thing, but in this context, if you have a lonely, cracked moon in the 12th house of isolation and distance and feeling separate, that only exacerbates that moon all the more. And on top of that, the 12th house can also be the house of, it's also the house of escapism, but it can also be the house of addictions. So we see, if we think of this insatiable kind of desires with food and drink and all that stuff, wanting to feed and satisfy. And then if I then skip over to this 8th house, which is just completely bombastic, the 8th house also deals with addictions as well, and those kind of taboos and that difficult side of life. Now, just because one has got planets in the 8th house, it is not the end of the world, because it all depends on the condition of the planets. Now, technically here, he's got Saturn in Libra, which makes that Saturn exalted, yeah? So you're thinking, oh yeah, that can't be too bad. But look too as well, we also have Pluto there, which is, Pluto represents everything the 8th house is to do about, and is almost like a steroid. It just absolutely expands that out even more. But not only that, he's also got Mars in there, which under the old rulership is also the ruler of Scorpio, but that's also relative to the 8th house. Saturn, planet Saturn, is also the Karka, the indicator of the Dusthana houses. Those are the difficult houses. So those are 6, 8, and 12. So he's got one of the Dusthana indicator planets in the 8th house. This is extraordinary, very, very challenging. And then all of them have got their energies, all of these energies going on together. This suggests that there is a real, I mean, it's been reported that there is that deep, dark underbelly, but this is the proof of it. There has even been suggestions that because this is death, transformation, rebirth, taboos, everything is absolutely amped up and intensified. This essentially is dictatorship. You know, if you think of it, think of all of the stories that we hear about North Korea and all of the stuff that kind of goes on there, and people that eventually escape and what it is that they tell. It seems almost shocking and unbelievable. There is also as well, there's been talk. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if it's been absolutely proved, but has been said that Kim Jong-un got rid of an uncle, if you remember that story. And I'm certain as well, like, this is not someone you want to cross, basically. You do not want to cross someone who's got Pluto, Saturn, and Mars in the 8th house, and actually in Libra, which is also a sign of, can be a sign of debates, conflicts, politics. So if you politically fall on the wrong side of this guy, you're finished, basically. Anyway, so this is like the main emphasis of the chart. Now, what I want to discuss here, which gives further insights, is we need to look back again at the D9, the Navamsha, to see if there's a correlation here, to see if it backs it up. So again, we can see that there's that dictatorial behavior. Let's look at the Navamsha chart, and boom, we're back in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a royal sign, by the way. It's one of the royal signs. Sagittarius, Cancer, and Leo are considered royal, so they're often the sign of kings or leaders, etc. We see here, look, Pluto moves to the 1st house in Sagittarius. So literally it is in there as part of the personality. And it's also with planet Uranus, so that unconventional streak. So if you imagine, Pluto is nuclear power. Saturn is infrastructure. Mars is energy. So if you put all of that together, think of all of that explosive energy that goes on. One of the things I wanted to say as well is that men that have a strong connection with Rohini can often have a very provocative side to them, because Rohini as a nakshatra in terms of itself is actually really quite still. It's an earth sign, it's a feminine sign, but it can almost be so still that people under this sign can actually become provocateurs in order to stir themselves up, to feel something. So if you think here, this is also the house of desires, like I said before, and the house of one's own efforts and the things we do with our own hands. So when I put it all together, I think of that lonely moon. Saturn is also put in aspect on the 5th house, which is creativity. When we look at the 5th house in the Navamsha, Saturn is there in the sign of Aries, which is its debilitation sign. Now, the 5th house is not only creativity, but it's also children. And as we know, Kim Jong-un doesn't have any heirs. So although the 5th house here is empty, there's no particular action going on. It is aspected by Saturn. Remember, Saturn causes restrictions and slows things down. But to confirm that, when we actually go into the 5th house of the Navamsha, it is debilitated. So it means that that aptitude, that fecundity that one would hopefully like to have in the 5th house is completely blocked. So this suggests that there's a lot of frustration, anger, and feeling of loss almost when it comes to his creativity, his projects. It could be that he either doesn't want children or is maybe unable to have children. That could also be a thing. I mean, because Saturn is a neuter planet in the sense of it's sterile. You know, when it has a strong aspect, you know, like that on the 5th house, it really does block a lot of those things. Or it could just be that he decided that he doesn't want to have children. Either way, there is a huge block there, and it bears out because he doesn't have an heir and successor. So you can see there's a lot of these challenges. And when I think of that energy, that bombastic energy and that frustration, I feel when those rockets are set off, that in a strange and unusual kind of way is like an act of creativity almost for Kim Jong-un, because it's a release. Imagine if you've got that much pent up creativity, you're gonna, and particularly with that Saturn debilitated, you know, really pulling everything back. You need something quite big to literally explode out. So I think those big kind of rocket launches and stuff like that have got a lot to do with that. Anyway, so let's continue. Let's look at the health. Now, I said Jupiter was aspecting the 6th house in the main chart. We have the moon also aspecting the 6th house, which we know the moon is in a very tricky position. The 6th house is a difficult house anyway. But then when we go to the 6th, we see Jupiter is with Neptune again. Do you see? This is really kind of where we really get in the clincher here, because this Neptune is very tricky, because it's, although it's connected in the 10th house, but it's showing that there is some kind of illness that affects the public appearance and the public reputation. Now, as we know on the news, he missed his grandfather's birthday, which of course is something that has never happened before, and that's really got people speculating. But when we actually look at the time period, now what is interesting is that Kim Jong-un is in the Mahadasha period of Saturn, which can almost always be challenging, but he's in Saturn Jupiter, so which is the Antardasha, which means that Jupiter is driving the car of his life at the moment. Now, although this Jupiter is very strong in the 10th house, do you see here, it's very close to that Gandanta point. Now, what that means is, it means that Jupiter is kind of drowning. So it's not as strong as it seems. And then it goes to the 6th house, and then it's with Neptune, which is well known for causing disease. On top of that, transiting Saturn, which is currently in Capricorn, and this falls into Kim Jong-un's 11th house, which is the house of the people and the public, and internationalism and bodies and all that kind of stuff, international bodies. You know, big element of internationalism there. Saturn is transiting. Saturn is aspecting his first house, which is the body. Now, this is a challenge. I've got Saturn aspecting my first house at the moment, like all Cancerians at the moment, and I must say, Saturn thins you out, and my goodness, yes, I've lost the pounds. Thankfully, obviously, I'm still here, so we'll see. But there's been a lot of speculation about, of course, is Kim Jong-un still alive? Now, you have this Saturn aspecting here, the first house. It's aspecting by transit the 5th house, which we know is already not a very good house for Kim Jong-un. But on top of that, Saturn is transiting. Saturn is aspecting itself in the 8th house. Now, this really is something. When you have transiting Saturn, the Karka of the 8th, in the 8th, aspecting itself in the 8th house by transit, this is very, very challenging, because we see it's also aspecting the 1st house. Not only that, when Saturn is one sign away from the moon, as it currently is, that is something called Sadi Sati, which is 7 years of trials. Now, a Sadi Sati can be amazing, but we know that this moon is on its own. So whenever the Saturn is one sign from the moon, that triggers Sadi Sati. This moon is already fragile and weak. It's cracked. And Saturn doesn't like the moon. So you can imagine the Saturn is creeping up and putting pressure on this very delicate and vulnerable moon already. So that's grim. But the thing that really kind of clinches it for me, which is Ketu, which is spirituality, but it has this excreting force. It can cut and it can separate. Yeah. Neptune is also a dissolving force. Neptune, let me tell you, Neptune is quite a killer. I really would say, when it comes to things like overdoses or drinking too much or weird things happening, crashing in fog like with Kobe Bryant and stuff like that, Neptune is up to a lot of stuff. But to add on that, Ketu is currently at 6 degrees and 7 minutes of Sagittarius. Yeah, so Ketu is right over Kim Jong-un's Neptune. 5 degrees 58 minutes. So it's basically 6 degrees. That is an exact conjunction. Now, there is speculation that he may have left Earth last Saturday. Yeah. Now, what I would say is, obviously, we don't know. We will never probably know, because, you know, it's very secret, or if we do actually find out what's going on, it's likely to be shrouded in secrecy, which it already is, because this is North Korea we're talking about. But I would say, with all those aspects together, you have to be basically Houdini to get out of that one. Those indicators for, you know, unfortunate things happening are very, very strong. So let's say he's alive. Yeah. If he is, this is severe illness. This is something that really takes you out, to the extent that he may not even be able to be leader anymore. Now, I don't think that it is a coincidence that his sister, Kim Yo-jong, has recently been announced, literally just in the matter of days, as the successor. Yeah, this is very, very significant. Obviously, they have a dynastic kind of thing going on in North Korea. But not only that, there's been speculation that he passed on Saturday, but the moon was in Taurus on Saturday, very close to that announcement. The moon also represents women, and we know that he has his sister. So what I'm saying is that it is looking like very much that this kind of transition is going to happen. Not only that, come September, Rahu, the north node of the moon, is actually going to move into Taurus. So that's Rahu, which also represents the sister, which suggests to me that the sister is really going to come into her own. So don't be surprised if, however they go about it, that the sister is announced in some way, potentially as the leader, or at least with a very significantly boosted role, which she already has, but this could be when it actually really kind of all comes to fruition. As for Kim Jong-un himself, even if he's survived this, he's severely unwell. These aspects are extremely difficult. But then, of course, when we think of that kind of very strong 8th house, which has this tremendous energy to inflict death and transformation, it could just be that he's just reached a point where it's all become a bit too much. Now, of course, this cannot be confirmed or denied. We don't know. But when I look at those transits, that is a very, very powerful transit. And that is something that is very, very challenging. Just to kind of like wrap up, when we look at the 12th house for Kim Jong-un, we see here we've got Venus, Mars and Sun in the 12th house, which also relates to bed pleasures. So this shows that there is the very kind of, shall we say, quite exotic approaches in that area without saying too much. But then there's this element of sacrifice as well. So what this also suggests is that although he may have been able to indulge his pleasures, they may have never really given him full satisfaction, which is almost a bit unfortunate. His mind was excellent, although it's retrograde here in Sagittarius, which is so for Mercury. In his Navamsha, Mercury moves to Gemini, its own sign, where it's exalted. So this is someone that was a very intelligent person, and also with a deep interest in the occult, because Rahu moves to the 8th house in Cancer, which is a water sign, a Brahmin sign. So without a doubt, he would have esoteric interests that we wouldn't necessarily know, but I'm sure those closest to him would know. And again, these are things he's probably confided in his sister, because Cancer is a feminine sign. So whatever's happened here is extremely significant. We know he's had this operation. Whether he's survived or not, we may have to find out. But what I can say is that you have to be Houdini to get out. I wouldn't even say Houdini. You have to be Count Dracula, basically, to get out of this one. Because even if he does get out of it, the health is going to be so significantly affected, he may not even be able to lead, or he may have already moved on. We have to see. I'm just putting it out there. I just wanted to honor the request from Shamila. So thank you so much for putting in that request. Just to reiterate, if anyone would like a consultation with me, I do various different consultations. I do a life path and business consultation, which is proving very popular, particularly in terms of how to restructure your life and your business post lockdown, because we're all going to have to reevaluate everything very soon. In May, we have major retrogrades happening. We've got Saturn, Jupiter, and Venus, and Pluto is already retrograde, so massive restructurings going on. So that could be a useful consultation for you, or romance, relationship, money. Feel free to check out my website on the archetypalblueprint.com. And also you can email me at info@thearchetypalblueprint.com if you'd like to learn more. It's been a pleasure doing this chart, and it has been absolutely fascinating. Feel free to comment and put in requests. If there's anyone in particular you would like me to look at, I'm more than happy to actually bring up their chart and have a little peep. And thanks so much for tuning in. And just to sign off, I have another wand. Haha! And so it is over and out until the next one.